All right. Hi, everybody. Ian here, and I am joined today by mastering engineer extraordinaire, Jeff Powell. Jeff, thanks so much for taking the time and being willing to talk to me today.
You're very welcome.
All right.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, you too. Um, okay, so fellow Midwesterner, I understand. You were telling me yesterday that you're from Missouri originally.
Yeah, I grew up in a little town. Well, I don't know if I ever grew up, but I was raised in a town called Bowling Green, Missouri. It's a little small town in northeast Missouri. Um, it's like 60 miles north of St. Louis or 30 miles south of Hannibal. So,
Gotcha. So it sounds like, yeah, maybe something about halfway between Iowa and St. Louis.
yeah.
Thereabouts. Is it on the Mississippi?
It's about 10 miles off the Mississippi. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
My high school job, I worked at a marina in Louisiana, Missouri. And that's a town, not two states.
Gotcha.
On my birth certificate, it causes lots of problems. Like, which one are you from? No, that's the town.
Yeah, I grew up in Dubuque, Iowa originally, and that's right on the Mississippi. But now I'm in rural northeast Iowa, probably 45-minute drive from the river. So how did you and so you started working at Ardent in 1989, I understand, and
yeah.
So how did that come about? Like, how did you come? You're this guy that grew up in Missouri, and then you ended up working at Ardent in Memphis. So, like, what was sort of your background at that time when you started working at Ardent?
Well, I mean, I guess it all kind of started when I was a teenager. I would stare at the back of record albums, and I loved listening to rock and roll and all kinds of music. And I started seeing these pictures of recording studios and these guys with all these knobs and buttons around them. I was like, wow, that's really cool. I think I'd like to do that. And but where do you go for an education, especially from a small town in Missouri? There's nothing like that. I'd never been in a recording studio before. So I got the great advice when I went to college to double major in electrical engineering and music, of all things. Nothing goes together in those two majors. They're like, yeah, just do that and then transfer to a recording school your senior year and you'll be good to go. So
And where'd you go to college, by the way?
I started at Mizzou in University of Missouri in Columbia.
Yep.
So, basically I took all these engineering and music hours and I realized, like, this is ridiculous. The music education was really if you were going to be a performer or a teacher. Didn't have any desire to do that.
And did you play an instrument back then?
Yeah, but not well. I mean, I've always played guitar and piano and stuff. My mother was an elementary school music teacher, so there was always music and instruments in our house and stuff. But always had a love for it. But I never really wanted to, be a rock star or anything like that. I wanted to be. I really liked the idea of being behind the scenes.
Gotcha. So you weren't like. Gotcha. So you weren't like playing in bands or anything at that point?
I never did. Just living rooms and, acoustic guitar stuff, So I went there and then I learned about the recording program in Memphis, Tennessee. At that time, it was called Memphis State was the university here. So I transferred down and they were like, well, none of these credits really amount to anything. None of these credits amount to anything. So let's just start you kind of all over again. And so, it was I definitely took the long way around, but I started going to school for recording. I really loved it. I got an internship at Kiva Studios at the time. They started letting me sit in on sessions. I mostly ran and got food. I mean, one of the big records they were doing there that I was the runner for was Stevie Ray Vaughan's Instep. I actually hit the record button one time. The first time in a session I hit the record button was with Albert King sitting behind me and playing his guitar. Well, I was recording a background vocal, but there was a gun on the console and a big old wad of cash. And Albert was just, he wasn't in a very good mood that day. And the guy who was engineering, I was there to be the assistant. He was like, hey man, I got an idea for a background vocal, record me. And I went, I didn't even know how to arm a track. He goes, oh man, just do this. I said, he'll shoot me if I race something. But I did it. And from that night on, I was kind of like, wow, okay, I got this. And oddly enough, to jump full circle and get way ahead of myself, just about 3 weeks ago, I mastered Born Under a Bad Sign by Albert King. I did the reissue off the master tapes. So that was a thrill.
That's awesome. And that must be happening more and more for you.
Oh yeah, yeah. Especially with Craft Concord, I do a lot of stuff with them. But then anyway, I moved over to Ardent to answer phones and got a job as a night guy there and runner. And oddly enough, I was there probably 6 or 7 months. And there was a night when the band was loading in, and it was the Vaughan Brothers. It was Jimmy Vaughan and Stevie Ray. And somebody didn't show up, and I was asked to help do the load in. Basically, I wasn't on the session or anything. And John Hampton was the engineer. Nile Rodgers was the producer. And anyway, when I saw the guys from the crew and stuff, we knew each other from the Instep days.
Oh, sure.
Hallway buddies. And so they were giving me a hug and we're just saying hi. And Hampton is looking at me like, you know all these guys? And I'm like, yeah, I was around when they were making Instep. And then Niall thought I was the assistant, so he was giving me stuff to do, and I was just doing it. And at the end of the night, Hampton goes, do you want the gig as the assistant on this? And I was scared to say yes, because number one, I was in way over my head, and there were like 5 guys in front of me at Ardent that were in line to do something like that. I said, well, I don't want to make anybody mad. He goes, I said, do you want the gig? So, okay. So my very first gig assisting at Ardent, went multiple platinum. I got a multiple platinum record out of the deal. And it was
wow.
That was easy enough, Oh, you at Ardent and you get a platinum record. That's cool.
And when you started at Ardent, you said like you were just answering phones, like what, like, do you remember the process of like trying to get a job at Ardent? Like, were you hoping to get like an assistant job, or were you thinking?
Yeah, it was the golden gig in town. Everybody wanted to work there, but my connection is that there was a guy who had worked at Kiva who was in the film department, and he had gone over to Ardent. And he literally called me one day and said, "Man, get over here. There's an opening." And I told him about you. So I was waiting tables and shit back then. So I didn't have any nice clothes. I had a waiter's uniform. I wore black pants and my black shirt for my interview at Ardent. And they actually asked me why I was wearing all black. It's like, I don't know if they thought I was a Satan worshiper. Or
I know. You're not one of these goth fellas, are you?
Yeah, like, what's the deal with you and the whole black? Well, I go, I'm poor and I'm waiting tables. This is the only nice shirt that I have, But when I did the Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimmy Vaughan gig, at the end of it all, John Hampton just basically said, you want to be my guy, be my assistant on all the stuff I do, because I can't really pay you. They didn't even pay assistants back then, but I'll buy you lunch and stuff when I can, and you can still go to school and come in late. And I was like, well, hell yeah.
Oh, so you were still in school at that point?
Yeah. For a while. And then I just got so busy that, between waiting tables for money and working every waking minute at Ardent, and trying to go to school, one of them had to go, because there's this thing called sleep that you have to do every now and then.
Turns out.
So that's what I did. And I dropped out of school. Again, I'll jump way ahead of myself here, but in 2008, as my career went on, they would start to ask me to come back to the class and do workshops or give a lecture or whatever and talk to the kids. And so I was used to doing that once a semester or so. And the head of the program called me into his office. He goes, man, would you come in my office when you're done here today? Boy, have I heard those words before. But I went in there and he's got my transcript spread out across his whole desk. And he's like, do you realize you got like 260 something undergraduate hours and no degree? I know, he goes, well, all you really have is you got a few electives and you got to do your big senior project, but you could turn in any record that you're working on now these days. And that could be do the right paperwork, and that can be your senior project. Do these electives, and you do need a 4-hour biology class. But I did. I went back in 2008 and I got my degree. So
right on, man.
I'm really happy. 27 years later, I was walking with my, got my degree, and I started being an adjunct professor over there for the program. So
yeah,
I started working over senior projects with the guys.
I see. Gotcha.
So yeah, to pull back to the Ardent days, I remember the very first night that I walked in the door, they were showing me around and they took me up to the tape vault, and they were like, these are the big star masters right here, man. And I was like, wow, cool. who's Big Star?
Who's that big star you're talking about?
I didn't have any idea who they were or what I was in for, but obviously throughout my career now that it's become a big part of my career, and I ended up, recording and mixing the Alex Chilton Man Called Destruction record, and then Alex and I got on real well. So when it was time to do the new Big Star record, I actually engineered and mixed that, and there was like 2 days left to go on the whole project. And the way we were doing is they would come in the morning with nothing, and they would write a song, and we'd record it and do everything that day on that song. So nothing existed in the morning. At the end of the night, we had a song. Okay. And Alex's stipulations were the label could not hear a note of it until it was done, and he wasn't going to change anything. So it's take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. So with about 2 days left, I came in one morning and Jody Stevens said, "Jeff, I need to talk to you in the other room." I went, "Oh, here we go. Alex hates everything. I'm fired. This is, it's going too good to be true." And he pulled me in the other room and he said, "Hey man, don't make a big deal out of it, but Alex really appreciates your contributions that you've been doing, and we want to make you a co-producer and give you a point on the record." Mm. Who does that? I mean, so, you hear all the stories about Alex and how gruff he might be and all that stuff, but he didn't have to do that. And the only thing he stipulated is don't come up and say thank you for that. I don't hear it. So.
That's great.
I saw you held up those records. Yeah. Are those the reissues that I cut?
These are the reissues that you cut. Yeah. Let's get into those in a little bit. I want to get back to when you started at Ardent, and then so there was that one engineer that kind of took you on as his sort of like full-time assistant, or like you weren't being paid yet, but like your main assistant.
Yeah.
What was that guy's name?
John Hampton.
John Hampton. Okay. And so that's kind of who you learned the ropes from, essentially?
Yeah, John. And then there was another house guy there named Joe Hardy, and Joe was the guy that did a lot of the later ZZ Top stuff, mm-hmm. and all that. And I worked a session with him, Tom Cochran, the Life is a Highway guy. I was on that session. Joe was producing that.
Gotcha.
So there's all kinds of crazy stuff I worked on there.
And so as an assistant engineer, you're miking up instruments. Are you running the tape machine? Are you running the board? Like what you're doing all that?
Not so much the board, but running the tape machine most of the time. Hampton would give me an input list a couple of days before, and I would make sure I had all the mics plugged up and checked, and basically in the general area where he wanted them. And then he would come in and focus the mics and twiddle this and twiddle that and move this and, get it tuned in and then go from there. But that included everything from going to getting lunch for people and, all that too. I'm telling you what, man, it's a big sign when through the years when I would work in studios all over the place. One of the big tells if you knew you had a good assistant or not was when it came time to do lunch. Did they take the order? Did they get the order right? And did they freak out when everybody, here's a 20 from me and here's a 10 from me, and they had to keep track of the change and stuff? I've seen kids just come apart, man, after 2 days of that, and they can't keep it. Or somebody's mad because their sandwich is soggy or what have you. Then you go get them another sandwich. You know what I mean? It's like you wait on them. Like I guess that came from my waiter days. Mm-hmm. That you try to make sure the client and the customer is always happy and having a great time. So it's kind of all points in between and cleaning up. You're the first one there in the morning. You're the last one to go at night and make sure, because you got to clean everything up too.
And what I'm hearing too is that it's not just about the raw engineering recording skills. It's about people skills too. You got to be able to work with people.
I'd say mostly.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think that's true in our whole industry. That goes with the superstar engineers and producers. I've worked with some who are absolutely wonderful and changed my life. And as a young man, when I would see some of these cats come through, I'd just go, boy, I'm not going to be like that. The second they leave the room, the band hates them by the end of the record, and their ego, they make all these decisions based on their egos instead of listening to what the band wants. And you can hear it. You can hear it in every record that's made like that. I used to call them bracelet shakers because these guys would like wear these gold rings and these bracelets, and they'd wiggle their hands like this before they'd lay them on they make all this bullshit, before they touch the faders and put their magic into it. It's like, oh, please, That's
Yeah.
you learn from both sides.
Yeah. And so you're assistant engineering, and then at a certain point, I imagine you're starting to have your own projects. Right?
Yeah, it really did work like that. Of course, there's like a little interim there where I'd start doing jingles, so
Hmm.
the jingle company that would come into Ardent, once a week, we'd probably knock out 12 jingles. So I learned how to record different people's vocals very fast, what kind of mics to use, how to just move really quickly, and how to dial in a sound without taking forever. You got to get this one in and get the next one, get them out and get the next one in. And, you had a lot of work to do. So I got fast. And all
this is
those,
like early 90s, probably?
yeah. Yeah.
And are you still recording on tape at that point, even jingles and stuff like that? You using tape machines?
Yeah, but at Ardent, we had these digital multi-tracks, these Mitsubishi 32 tracks, which is kind of terrifying now that I know what great converters sound like. They were okay, but they were, these machines cost $250,000 each or something. Now I hear people in Nashville say people literally roll them out to the street, to the curb, come get it, but we were doing some experimental things, some really tough things, because those, Tom Dowd was one of the producers I got to work with. I did like 7 records with him, and he kind of changed everything for me, but he really embraced the new technology. He loved the whole idea of digital.
And early digital was on digital tape, right? That was
yeah.
Not, yeah.
Yeah, and you couldn't never touch the tape. Oil from your fingers would run it. You had to white glove it if you were touched. It was really thin. It wasn't like analog tape. It was handled completely different. And there was this, you couldn't really edit with it, but there was
like you couldn't splice.
Well, not really, but Dowd found this weird, I don't know if it was in the manual or what, but if you really needed to do that, he wanted to try it. It was on the Allman Brothers record that we were working on. And so he wanted to just basically merge 2 takes together with the whole outro and the jam out on one song with the body of the song on another. So he's like, all right, kid, we're going to do this digital. So it takes 2, we'd have to wheel in another 32 track tape machine. And what you would do is you would have to make a copy onto the other machine. So we did the edit, and on the digital machines back then, you had to wear white gloves, because if you got it all gummed up with finger oil, you just ruined it. But you had to splice it together to where there was just a little daylight in between. And so when it would come by the error correction things, instead of trying to fix that error, it would just completely give up, and it would go by so fast that in theory you wouldn't hear it.
Yep.
So Dowd wanted to try this. So we did it, and we sweated over it. We got it cut together. And then once you do that, you play it and see if the edit's okay. And then you immediately transfer the edited piece onto another digital tape, no generation loss because it's digital. You transfer it over, and that's your new master, and you just did an edit. It took 4 or 5 hours to do this, and he wouldn't let go. He's like, we got it. He just basically sent everybody home for the night, and me and him were going to do this. So we did it. And the funny thing is, the next day, Butch Trucks, the band comes in and listens, and Butch Trucks goes, I got an idea for an overdub. We had to go to the drum shop and get a gong. And right where we made our tape edit, he wanted to overdub a gong. So we could have done it really shitty and covered our beautiful edit, with a friggin' gong. But anyway, we did it. So there was crazy things like that we used to do with the tape. And there was actually another cool thing, was an internal patch bay on the tape machine. So if you wanted to bounce track 2 over to track 13, they were like little patch cords this long. You just plug it in on the machine and plug it over there and hit go. And that's how you bounce tracks. And then Hampton one day, out of boredom, figured out those little patch cords, we'd borrow them from another machine, and they were never where they were supposed to be. And us assistants would always bitch at each other, like, you take all the patch cords, man? But Hampton figured out one day you could do it with a paper clip. So we were like making these digital transfers with a paper clip stuck in a $250,000 machine. But kind of absurd.
So that was early digital. Do you remember about at what point like a hard drive based Pro Tools whatever thing was brought in?
We didn't have Pro Tools at first. We had a 2-track machine called a Studer Diaxis, and that was became my specialty, because I figured a way I could sync that machine up to the digital tape machine. So when we were doing vocal comps were all the rage back then. You know, you would do 10 tracks of vocals and you'd get it down to 1, and then you do another 5 and you get the best of those down to 1. That's a lot of what I did as an assistant, you know. The engineer or the producer would make the choices what to do, but I'm over there going as fast as I can, doing these bounces and edits and things. So it started off like that. There was only one Pro Tools system, I think, in town when they first came out, when it was still sound design.
Do you remember about when that was? Was that mid 90s or so? The late 90s?
Mid 90s, probably, yeah. And nobody at Ardent got excited about it, you know, and John Fry, the owner, was always, Ardent was kind of famous for being, you know, cutting edge on the technology. He was never afraid to get the latest and greatest new thing and stay ahead of the curve with everybody on that. But in that case, I think I had my personal Pro Tools rig before Ardent bought one. It was like they weren't down with it for some reason, you know. But once they did, and there came a point where you had to, you know, you had to have, it didn't have to be Pro Tools, but you had to have something like that or you were going to get left behind. And so it worked its way in, and then there was a system in every room and all that stuff.
Yeah. And then, so eventually you were just like, you were no longer an assistant engineer, you were a head engineer, and eventually you were producing.
Yeah, then a staff producer. They had a label back. Ardent had a little label, so I was even A&R and some scouting bands, and that's how I found that band Jolene that signed with Ardent, and you know, we were all really tight, and so that was one of my first, I would say, bigger productions of something. We ended up getting them signed to Sire, and you know, we all had super high hopes for them. They were a fantastic band, but yeah, so Ardent had a little label, and yeah, I was doing all that all the time. And it just basically got to a point where I was getting asked by other bands and people to come, will you come to California? Will you come to Seattle? Or all over the place, that I just finally, you know, went into Ardent and basically said, I'm going to be independent now. I'll still make this my home base and bring projects here to record and mix as well when I can, but I'm going to be on my own and take care of all that myself now. And
gotcha. Wasn't so that was 90. So that was 97.
Yeah.
And
sounds right.
And so you're producing, you're engineering, and then at a certain point, did you get into, so like, you know, I know you started cutting vinyl in 2008 or so. So like, did you start doing mastering before you started cutting vinyl?
Not really. I had there was in my, what do you call it? All music guide. There's one mastering credit I have for a guy named Leisure McCorkle. I don't know if I just EQ'd some, I don't even remember exactly what I did, but no, I never really wanted to. I always enjoyed, you know, getting it in a place where it's the best I thought it could be. And then, you know, I had my different mastering guys I used through the years, that it was always amazing to me. I'd give them what I thought was the best I could do and then make it a little bit better. And they would, you know, I never was somebody to pick at it or have this vision of exactly how everything had to be to make me happy. It just, you know, I apply that to today. That I think the worst part of my job is when you have to listen for mistakes. I hate it. And when someone sends you a test pressing and they want you to sit there with a legal pad, I heard a pop there, that mark down what time that was, you know, that's torturous to me. If you can't get your record and put it down and play it, drop the needle and get some enjoyment out of it and just listen to it for the beauty that it is, instead of worrying about, was that a piece of dust that just went by, or is that in the record, or what do we do about it? How do we fix it? It's just, I don't know. It kind of just, some people do that more than others, and some people don't do that at all, you know?
So my understanding, like I read a little bit about how you kind of got into it, which was basically Larry Nix, right? Like in 2008, there was, I think, a particular band that was bugging Larry Nix about wanting him to cut the record, but Larry hadn't been doing that for a while. He still had a lathe, I believe, but it wasn't up and running anymore.
Right. It's the Stax lathe. It's the lathe that Stax Records bought in 1971.
And that's interesting too, that like Ardent was like, they were like a full service thing. Like it was recording, but also all the way up to cutting the disc you could do at Ardent.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And there was a video department when I started there too. So,
Hmm.
those cheesy ZZ Top videos where they're throwing the kid the keys and all that. That was all
Yeah.
done Ardent Video.
No shit.
Yeah.
Okay, so Larry gets the lathe up and running, which I imagine was no small thing.
No,
Um,
the help of Chris Jackson, the Ardent tech, and even John Fry, the owner. They
mhm.
were all in there with their sleeves rolled up.
And that essentially got Larry back into cutting discs, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure did.
And 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 you basically you kind of learned it from him basically as he got his thing back up and running. Is that kind of how
Very
it
much
played
so.
out?
Yeah. When he decided to do it, it's really when I first asked him, he was just an absolute no way. No way. I think he even said something like, I'm on medication because of that damn machine. Some days I know now what he's talking about, but
And what was it, by the way? Was annoyment? Was it a VMS 70?
yeah, yeah.
Which is what you have behind you too, right?
Yeah, their rack was different. A VMS, I think it was a 66 rack. But
Which
that's
they named their lathes after the year that came out, right? The VMS 66 came out in 1966. The 70 came out in 1970. The 80 came out in 1980, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
I certainly know there's not any left laying around anywhere that I know of. But yeah, not even knowing that I was going to get my own someday or try to buy that one or what have you. I just thought it'd be a cool thing to have in my arsenal. I'll record, mix, and produce your record, and I can cut the vinyl too. And vinyl was just bubbling up, again.
Right.
I wasn't looking at it thinking, now this is the trend I need to catch on to. This is really going to be something. I just loved doing it. The first time I ever cut a record and dropped the needle and listened back to what I just cut, my knees literally went weak. I mean, I just like, what have I been doing for the last 20 years? This is a completely different listening experience. And it was emotional for me. And so
And were you listening to vinyl on your own at that point at all? Like at home or
I had
anything?
stopped and come back, and I often credit, he was my assistant engineer at the time, Lucas Peterson. Lucas works with me today. He's a cutter. So he's been with me all along. But it really was as simple as on a lunch break, he got a record in the mail at Ardent, and he opened it in front of me, and he was checking it out and looking at the liner notes and making sure the condition of the record, all that, and I was like, wow, I forgot that feeling, how cool it is when a record comes in the mail or when you go buy one in the store.
Yeah.
I stopped. So that inspired me to go home and get my turntable out and hook it back up again and start listening to old records in my collection that were filthy dirty, but it's still, it moved me. I was like, wow,
Totally.
I really want to learn how to not just do this or how the buttons work. I want to do this. And so
And
I
so
did.
that sort of aha experience of like cutting the record and listening back to it and getting the chills, is that kind of what made you realize that you wanted to do more than merely add that to your arsenal? You wanted to sort of like jump in with both feet?
Yeah. Subconsciously, I think then there was never a time. It's almost like then 4 years go by and I'm cutting vinyl all the time now, and it's like, I don't know that in 4 years if I was doing enough to make a living, but right now today I'm looking at my list. I'm 70 sides deep, man.
Man.
And Lucas cuts with me as well, so he does stuff the way our day works. Usually, he's got a young daughter. He drops her off at school, and he comes in and cuts in the morning, however many sides he has to do, and then he lets me know, and then he leaves, and I come in behind him, and I cut till either it's FedEx time, or if I don't make the normal FedEx store time. In Memphis, we can drive out to the airport up till midnight. So you see the car dashing to the distroplex, I think they call it, just right out to the airport, man. I get it in there at 11:55 sometimes, but it'll be there the next day. So
it can get
I don't do
plated
that every
immediately.
night. Yeah, if it's really important, I don't do that every night, certainly, but that's kind of how the day goes here. We're cutting a lot of records.
So like the first few years you're getting into cutting, are you sort of like doing producing and engineering and also some cutting, and then slowly cutting has just taken over everything at this point? Is that how it
Exactly.
progressed? Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that's all you do now. You're a mastering engineer. You cut records. That's it.
That's it.
No kidding.
That's it. And
Mhm.
and I'm very happy. I mean, I love doing it, and I get to keep working on more and more incredible projects that people trust me with. And you know, when something like Randy Newman, Good Old Boys, comes across my list, I mean, that's one of my favorite records. I was just, oh my God, I was beside myself. And then it was the regular two sides, and then there was another two sides with basically Randy Newman in the studio with a piano talking to the engineer, explaining his concept of the record, which is completely different than what came out. Some of the songs are threaded in there, but it was almost like a play or something. And it was, you're like, wow, I didn't know that's what that song meant. Oh man, you know.
Huh.
So,
And then at what point? At what point did you get your own lathe? So is that lathe behind you there? Is that the one you bought from Chad
yes,
Kassem?
yes, it sure is.
So when did that happen, and how did that come about?
2015 is when I got it. Sadly, the end of 2014, John Hampton passed away after a long illness, and 2 weeks after that, John Fry passed away suddenly. And so Ardent was kind of like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen now?
And up until then, you had been cutting on the Ardent lathe?
Yeah. So, you know, basically they said, just keep going. And, you know, I was basically renting the machine from Larry. So I would basically write Larry a check for however many records I could. I was giving him a percentage basically. And, up until, in 2014, when John passed away. So I was there till about the summer of 2015. And let's just say it ended abruptly there. Didn't see it coming. And all of a sudden I didn't have a place to work. So I didn't know what to do. I was pretty devastated. And, you know, because you can't just go, well, I'll just go buy my own lathe. I mean,
because there aren't any.
And I happened to, I was good friends with Kenny Wayne Shepherd's dad, and I was on I was pretty involved in the Recording Academy, and I was on the board of governors with him. He kept telling me about Chad. He goes, if you're into vinyl, man, Chad knows everything about vinyl. You just need to know him. And I saw in one of the trade magazines that Chad had just bought Doug Sax's lathes. And it was basically, that was a tandem setup, two lathes that were together, and he would cut two of everything that he cut. I actually got to go hang out with Doug one day. He invited me to his place in Ohio and spent a lot of time with me. I'll never forget it. Oh, cool. I remember asking him, I was like, well, why do you do two of everything? He's like, what's better than one? Two? He goes, you got it. I'm not really sure what that means, but two's better than one, I guess. But yeah, so I saw that in the trades that Chad had bought Doug's lathes after he had passed away. So I just called him and I just introduced myself and said I'm a friend of Ken's. And we talked for a while. And I said, well, man, you know, I'm looking for a lathe pretty hard. You know, are you thinking about busting up the twins and maybe selling one of them? And he goes, no, I'm going to keep it the way Doug had it and all that. And And so, okay, that's cool. We made small talk. And anyway, I just sent him an email the next day. It's like, it was nice meeting you and talking to you. And look forward to working with you again down the road. And he's like, nice to meet you too. Let me know if you need a lathe. And I was like, what? We just talked about this. So I called him right back and I go, I thought you weren't going to split them up. He goes, no, I'm not, but I have another VMS 70 in this church that I own. We do a blues festival every year, and we go direct to disc, and I only kind of use it once a year.
Oh my God.
I'd sell you that. You know, it needs a little work. Order phone head and an order phone rack. But at that point I was like, I don't care if I can get my hands on a lathe, you know. So we came to a price, and I was like, can you give me 10 days, 2 weeks to come up with the dough? And he goes, 10 days will be fine. So, I mean, I think what was going on is he had spent a lot of cash getting Doug Sax's lathes, and he probably needed some cash in a hurry. So
sure. Yeah.
I had 10 days to come up with it. I went to the bank and everything was cool. My credit's great. And everything, I was literally leaving my house to go pick up the cashier's check and put it in my bank. And I got a phone call and they said, Mr. Powell, we're sorry. We can't, what are the guys? The underwriters won't approve this loan because they don't understand what this is. And it's an old piece of equipment. They wouldn't know what to do with it if you were to default. And I'm sorry. But we can give you a $5,000 business line of credit. And I just went, okay, I'll take that. And I had 2 days to come up with the dough, basically. So as second mortgage on the house, as much as we could, we had one, a small one, but we ran that up to the hilt and basically every credit card. And the last day, I mean, I was $1,000 short and I called a friend. I'm like, I need $1,000 in an hour, man. And, they're like, are you in jail? I go, not yet, but I'm going to be if I don't get this $1,000. And so we got it all just under the wire. I wired Chad the money at 10 minutes till 5, which was the cutoff. He called me and he goes, all right, man, it's yours. I got to tell you, though, I'd kind of changed my mind. If you were 1 minute late, the deal was off.
Oh, my God.
And I was just like, So, and it's funny, I've stayed friends with Chad, it's whenever I see him, he's like, you caught me in a weak moment, man. I'm glad you're making a living with it, but I really wish I wouldn't have sold it,
That's how I knew about it is in an interview he did, I think maybe with Kevin Gray, with somebody in any case, he talked about it. And he says, like, I showed that to Jeff Powell and the one thing that, makes me feel good about it is he's making a living off it. He's feeding his family off of that. So
right. And he popped in here like during the pandemic one day, just popped in and he was still in pretty, everybody's stand away and wear a mask and the whole thing. He just popped up one day and it's so funny because he just kind of kept on. He always talks about it, man. It's like, oh man, you caught me in a weak moment, but I'm glad that you got it, Chad's a good guy, man.
He is. Well, I mean, not that I know him, but I like him. All right. So that kind of brings us up to, let's just go straight for the big guns here. You cut the first 2 Big Star records from the original Analog Master, and not that long ago, right? These came out, I think, in 2020. Yeah. So when did you cut that in 2020 or 2019? Do you remember?
I don't remember. Mm-hmm. It seems like yesterday, know. Yeah. But certainly not long ago.
Yeah. And so, talk about coming full circle, right? You mentioned like your first day at Ardent, they show you the Big Star tapes and everything. That's obviously their pride and joy there. And then here you are cutting new lacquers from those tapes. And so, just what can you tell me about that whole experience of like learning that you're going to get to do it? Like, did you have to talk anyone into it, or how did you get the gig? I guess maybe is where we could start with.
It kind of came as a group thing. Concord Craft, a fellow named Mason, reached out to me through Brandon Sievers at Memphis Record Pressing. Okay, that's a plant here in town.
Yep. Which is where they pressed it.
Right.
Like everything here was done in Memphis. It even says here on the sticker.
Yeah. So they did like this Made in Memphis series is what they wanted to do. And they said, can you cut from tape? And I go, no, I don't have a preview deck. And I really don't get that many inquiries about it to justify the expense of owning it in the space that it takes up in my room and all that, because my room's pretty small. And I said, how many titles are we talking? And they told me what they had in mind. And I'm like, hold on. There. I'll be finding me a preview deck. So I really want to do that. So the first, these Big Star records were, number 1 record in Radio City. Were lumped in with Booker T and the MG's Melting Pot, the Barkays Got a Groove, an old David Porter record, Johnny Taylor record, a whole bunch of Staple Singers stuff. So all that kind of came together. So when I heard Big Star was within that group, I was, and I got to say though, not that I was nervous or really worried too much about it, but I was ready for some Rotten Tomatoes to be thrown at my head. I know how fans are with that. And
And this was going to be your first time cutting from tape, right? Or had you cut from tape when you were using Larry Nix's stuff?
No, I never had on the machine. So it's really no different, except that you're limited by some of the tools that I use in the digital realm when I'm cutting. I don't have access to that. So, because I'm not running through that chain, obviously.
Nope.
So my overall thinking was that, I didn't want to mess with it. I wanted it to sound as close to the original as I possibly could. And maybe, whatever this might be in my mind, maybe just make it sound a little bit better.
Right.
What's better?
Well, not rolling off the bass as much as 50 years ago, right?
What's that?
Not rolling off the bass as much as 50 years ago, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'd heard a lot of stories about it too, just coming up at Ardent, how John Fry, those records are very bright, really bright.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were stories that John Fry was in there riding the heel. This is a heel. Can you see this behind me?
See, you're pointing at something that can't see the details of it though.
Let's see here. This thing right here. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So that monitors how much helium I'm putting on the coils of the cutter head itself. So if you're cutting something really bright or with excessive high frequency information, like like a punk rock record or something, you might want to crank up the helium a little bit to keep from causing unnecessary roughness to the cutter head.
Okay.
Because you can blow it up, if it's too extreme. I don't think the Big Star records were in danger of blowing it up. But anyway, they were really bright. So in my mind's eye, I wanted to still have the brightness, but maybe not as much of the piercing part of it. So sometimes it just, with headphones or something, it could kind of tickle your eardrums a little bit. It was, but that's what it was meant to be. So I didn't think I should have a better idea about it. You know what I mean? So here's the big thing. So it turned into this really crazy deal. So I get the tapes and I open them up and I put them on the machine, first of all, to see, are they shedding it all? That's the first thing we do. We play a little bit and then you clean the heads. And if your Q-tip's dirty, then you're like, I better go bake these.
You gotta bake them. Yep.
If it's not, then you're fine. And now I know some of the brands that don't shed, typically, like Scotch doesn't really shed, depending on what model number, what year, what batch, and all that. But anyway, the shedding wasn't so much a problem, but there were no tones on the tape. No, nothing to calibrate the.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Calibrating.
The machine. I'm like, that just, I can't imagine John Fry not putting calibration tones. So I don't know if they were left off and we tried to find them somewhere else, but they weren't to be found. So now I've got to align these master tapes and cut from them with no idea of how their tape machine line or your azimuth and all that stuff. It's very important to have tones.
Could it mean just real quick about those tones? The first thing that comes to my mind is that could it be that the original issues were cut from a copy of the master and that they put the tones on the copy? What was that a common thing back then? Do you have any idea?
It could have been. I should have paid more attention that night when they showed me sitting on the shelf at Art before they went to Iron Mountain or wherever.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, but so what I did is I got old pressings and I got original pressings and I think there were a couple of subsequent ones, if I'm remembering right. But I really paid attention to the original pressings. And so by ear, I basically aligned listening to the music and then listening to my tape machine and being back and forth in the room. I basically aligned the tape machine by ear. And then the other twist was that it was Dolby, and those have to be aligned properly as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to figure all that in and make sure I wasn't using too much Dolby, because you'll start to hear it suck like a compressor, and it's like the chances of me completely screwing it up and sounding awful were high. A
lot can go wrong, it sounds like.
Yeah, whatever could go wrong probably might, and which, because of my background at Ardent, was a little unnerving, but I just decided, I'm going to go for it, man. Just do the best I can. So I basically aligned it all by ear and got it close. And then I dumped the tape into my Pro Tools rig and digitized it. From there, I basically shut my eyes, and I was using plugins and stuff that wasn't in my analog rack, but I basically dialed it in by ear without looking at what I was doing till I thought it sounded as good or better than the original. Then I looked what I did, and I wrote that down, and then I left the digital domain, went back to the analog domain, and applied those EQs and compression settings that I'd come up with by ear to my analog setup.
Yeah.
And that's what I cut off the tape. And I had to do that on Number One Record and on Radio City, and it's everyone seemed to love it. So
I love it. you hit it out of the park, man.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then this is something I asked Kevin Gray about. Like, what tools are at your disposal when you're cutting a record from tape? Like he said, it's pretty much just EQ. That's about all there is to it. Was there anything else that you had involved there?
Yeah, just a touch. One of what I would call my secret weapon is the Spectrasonics V610. Those are peak limiters.
Oh, sure, of course, yeah.
And the way that I do, I'm friends with Bill Cheney, who owns the company, and we're kind of Spectrasonics crazy around here. There's a lot of Memphis history with Spectrasonics consoles. There was a company called Auditronics here in Memphis that started assembling the Spectrasonics parts and making consoles out of them. And then that's a long, crazy story anyway, very Memphis-like. But some of those started going out the back door, I think, and they stopped. Basically in my chain, the way I use them is just as the lightest peak limiter. I don't even, no gain reduction at all. But the theory behind these Spectrasonics, the way they work is they reduce the electronic peaks, and they're faster than anything else made. So in theory, what you have, if you set it light enough and find the sweet spot, you're basically knocking down those electronic peaks, and then everything else that it sees later in your chain is music. And so now you're dealing with just the music and not these electronic peaks that can cause compressors to really suck or jump or react to overreact in a way. So you can get by, to me, with much more subtle little moves and things like that I'm going to do down the chain. But I'd agree totally with Kevin. Mostly it's just a little touch of EQ here or there, how much you filter, and then, your level as well. It seems to me, it's a question I haven't really answered yet, but I was, one of the things that I got to work on was the Al Green singles box set. And I think there were 52 sides, 26 7-inches. But I would compare it to the old pressings when I was cutting those, and I couldn't get within 2 dB of level that they were cutting them much hotter than I could, to the point where it would blow my circuit breaker on my lathe, which means if that doesn't catch it, it's going to blow my cutter head, and that's $10,000. So wow, there's a certain level you got to be kind of careful with as far as cramming level onto a disc. But I asked several people, like, how could they do it then and I can't do it now? And it's like, basically listen to those things. They're completely distorted. You're like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, but that's just those cool old records sound, right? And they're like, well, yeah, but they're creaming it, man. So don't worry. If you want it to sound, quote unquote, as good as you think you can get it, there's a thing on people's stereo systems called a volume knob, and they can turn it up as loud as they want, So, yeah, it's that's in my chain. Basically, it starts with the Spectrasonics and then moves down to, I have a lot of dangerous music gears. Chris Muth is the guy who maintains my lathe, and he designs all the dangerous music stuff. And it was funny because I was looking at something for Sterling, and Chris basically designed Sterling records and back in the day, and a lot of their custom gear turns out to be this dangerous music stuff. So our chains are very similar to what they're doing at Sterling. I was kind of surprised, but then I wasn't surprised because Chris built their stuff, so. Gotcha.
Chris, you said he's the guy who maintains your lathe and your chain there?
Yeah, Chris Muth.
Gotcha. And that, that obviously is a huge key thing, is to have a guy who can
it absolutely
keep that stuff up.
It absolutely is. And I've hired Chris from the beginning. He flew to Salina, Kansas to help decommission this lathe and came to Memphis to set it up when it was time. And I've told the story a few times that, he came for a week or whatever when we were putting it back together here. And, there was a lot to do. I basically had changed out racks, and he sold me a Neumann cutter head. And, we're putting it all together for the first time. And he's crawling around, and the room is all got soldering stuff everywhere. Excuse me. And up to I knew he had to leave. I couldn't remember what time of the afternoon it was, but he was crawling around the floor, and there's 10 minutes. He goes, "Be ready to go in 10 minutes." And he's starting to throw his stuff in his bag, and he's crawling around the floor. We haven't cut anything yet. I mean, he was cutting some silent grooves here and there, but when I wasn't in the room, but I didn't know what he was doing. And anyway, we get in the car, and I had to rush him to the airport. And I'm like, "Are you going to come back, or are you done?" Or, I was sick to my stomach. I was like, what just happened here? Is it work? He goes, "Just start cutting, man." And hold on a second, I'm going to shut my door. Somebody's here.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I hit pause on the recording, but it's going again.
Okay. So anyway, he just, before he gets out of the car, he goes, "Just start cutting stuff, man. Call me, let me know how it goes." And I was like, what just happened? And
where is he? Is he based out of New York or something, or where is he?
Yeah. He lived in Yonkers, and he's worth every penny. But I'm telling you, he's not cheap either. I just spent a lot of money, and well spent. I will always do it, but I didn't know what had just hit. I didn't know him that well at the time, and I was like, I was flabbergasted. So I came back and I put a disc on, and I cut a silent groove, and then I dropped the needle to see how it sounded, and I thought, "Oh shit, the volume's down," or whatever. And I'm looking around for the stupid button, or this is muted, or and it turns out it was not muted. That's how quiet it was. I couldn't. And then I cut some music. I went, "Oh my God, this is I've never cut anything like this." So he made it sing, man. He made it mint, and he always takes care of me. I actually blew my cutter head during the pandemic. June of that first year, when there's and oddly enough is when Italy was, if you remember, was really locked down tight.
Yes.
They had police in the streets and stuff.
Yep.
So when I called Chris, I took some pictures with my microscope, and I think I know what this means, but he's like, "Oh yeah, dude, your left side's blown." And I said, "That's what I thought." He said, "Well, do you want me to send it to a guy to get it done as quick as possible so you can keep working, or do you want the best guy in the world to do it?" I'm like, "I want the best guy in the world to do it." So we sent it to this guy in Italy, and I don't know how much of this, I don't know exactly, but the story I got is basically that he had to sneak out of his house at night and go zigzag down the alleyways to his shop and to be able to rewind my cutter head. But when I got it back, again, it's one of those, "Oh my God, was it possible for it to sound any better?" I guess so. Yeah. So, and he drove down from New York City to help me, because you can't just pop it on and now you got to realign your whole machine. So he took the care to do that. And yeah.
And at the time, flying probably wasn't realistic.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the version of Big Star's third that I have. This is that, the complete masters thing or whatever that you cut. But when I was kind of double checking everything before we talked, I discovered a different version of this from 10 years ago that I didn't even realize existed. There's the Big Star's third, the test pressing edition that Larry cut in 2011 originally, and then you just recut not too long ago. This is ringing a bell. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Larry cut from the tape, and I know that the sourcing is always a sticky subject. I learned that from Kevin, so I don't feel pressured to reveal anything. But I had the impression that it's been digitized in the meantime, and that's what you cut from.
That I did, yeah. That was from a digital source. Michael Graves provided. Now I don't know if, and I do a lot of work for Omnivore, so that's the company that it came from, and Michael does all their mastering and pre-mastering.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you know anything about like that tape and why they found it necessary to digitize it and not just hand you the tape?
If those are the test pressings, I don't know. I don't know if there is a tape. It might have come from a disc. It could have.
I guess my understanding was that the thing that Larry cut in 2011 was that sort of compilation tape, like they compiled all the songs onto a tape to cut a test pressing from in 75, which he cut, I believe, in 75. And then it didn't come out at the time, blah, blah, blah. And then all those years later,
okay,
that same tape was around and he cut from it. I think that's based on reading the labels and stuff like that. That's what it looked like.
That makes sense because I know Omnivore has, a close relationship with Ardent and their stuff, because Third falls it different than Number One Record and Radio City. Mm-hmm. They're owned by, I think Ardent still owns Big Star 3.
Gotcha.
And all the associated things. So I don't know if Michael got the tape and prepared the digital master for me. That happened.
That was the impression that I got, is that's how it must have worked, but I don't know.
Yeah, and gosh, again, just to speak, of Michael, he's amazing. He's God. He makes my life a lot easier. He really has the sensibilities to prepare masters for vinyls.
And I think he's the one who prepared this stuff too. I'm looking, mastered by Michael Graves at Osiris Studio. Right. So he presumably got tapes and transferred them and then sent those transfers onto you. Okay. And this sounds fucking amazing. Like this is like I'm an all analog guy. I love to see things cut from tape. I seek those out. I spend a lot of money for things that are cut from tape. Having said that, this is like Exhibit A in stuff that can sound really good, even though it's digital. It's just incredible.
Good. I got some nice notes on that. I'll tell you what, man, as much as just one of those calls some days or an email from somebody, it's amazing that how it can just make your day when something may be going tough or you're, it takes all kinds in this business. And some people are certainly more fun and easy to work with than others, but a nice little note from somebody saying, Matt, wow, man, I just got the test pressing for Big Star 3. Honestly, I was kind of tired of listening to that record, but now I can hear things I've never heard, things like that. You're just kind of like, wow, thank you. It does make a difference to hear feedback like that instead of just like, all right, what's up with this bullshit, man? Who ruined this record? Was it your fault or was it the other guy's fault or you just doing what you were told or, there's that too sometimes, unfortunately.
So we're getting close to an hour here, but there's a couple other things I'd like to talk to you about. So you got the tape machine in the context of doing the Big Star and a handful of other stuff for that sort of all Memphis thing. Mm-hmm. And so like that was sort of your impetus for getting it. And so now you can cut from tape. And so like, how has that changed things in terms of like, are you getting a lot of stuff now to cut from tape, or what's that looking like?
Enough, because if I were just a tape guy, and I do charge more to cut from tape just because it takes up more of my day. But you can only move so fast when you cut from tape. And one of the main things that takes time is we do dummy run. I do a dummy run, which is basically I set everything up where I think it's going to sound good. I might do a little test cut here on a scrap to be able to play it back. Because as you know, when we cut the real masters, you can't listen back to it. So we'll do all that. We'll listen to some of it, and then you basically set it up and you hit go, and this moves across the platter as if it were cutting, but you're not dropping the cutter head and actually making a cut. So I do my moves between the songs and the spacing and the banding and all that. And if there's a little ruler down here, and if you make it before it hits 0, it's going to fit, and then you put a disc on, you cut it. If you don't make it before it hits 0 or close to the 0, you've got to figure a way to make up that time. So that's when you go back and, I may turn down the bass a little bit or roll it off a little more or turn the volume down. Bass and
to make the groove skinnier, basically.
Yeah, that's what eats up the most real estate is low end and volume. So, but I think that's another thing that I might be a little different on is if it doesn't make it, I don't just go screw it, turn it down 2 dB and roll everything off under 60 and it'll fit. I go very small increments and just try to maximize how much can I fit on there and still make the time. So that means I got to do another dummy run. So every time I do it, it's real time. And that's what starts taking time. Plus, if you're doing it off tape and you're running the tape past the heads again, depending on how old or what condition the tape is in,
Sure.
that kind of makes you nervous too. So I have before, if I felt the tape was a little too fragile, I've made a digital copy and then start doing my, kind of like I said about the Big Star thing, I'll do my moves and dial it in that way.
Yep.
And then once I make it, then I just, you take it out of the digital mode and you just put the tape on and you run it off the tape. And
that way you're only playing the tape back twice, essentially, once to copy it, once to cut it.
Exactly.
Gotcha. And then do you got kind of a guesstimate of like how much at this point, how much you cut into tape versus cutting from digital?
It's still, I'd say 80% digital, 20% analog. I did just get a big one. I'll tell you about. It's kind of a hybrid. So Concord Craft contacted me to cut the new Watt Stax reissue, which is going to consist of the double LP as it is now. That comes from tape. And then they're going to have a 10 LP bonus disc with all kinds of stuff. I don't know if anybody's heard it before or not, but that's going to come from a digital source. So 24 sides on that one. So I'm excited about that. So yeah, it can even be that part tape and part digital.
Yep.
But and then I've been doing the Creedence Clearwater Revival Chronicles, their greatest hits record. I guess that's the biggest seller at Concord Craft. So I've cut that one 3 or 4 times, maybe more.
Oh, wow.
Because they're putting them in different plants all over the world. So somebody's going to be 6 months. I sent one to Poland. I sent Creedence and Creedence went to Italy to a plant I'd never heard of. And I cut the Vince Guaraldi trio, Charlie Brown Christmas.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
I just cut another version of that, and that went to Poland. So I was sitting there thinking, like, maybe Charlie Brown can save the world in that region of the world. Blast some Charlie Brown Christmas. You can't be pissed off when you're listening to that.
Yeah. Those are essentially like replacement lacquers, basically, right? Do you happen to know like how many records can ultimately be pressed from a given lacquer? Because I'm guessing from a given lacquer, you can make a certain amount of like fathers and mothers. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, oh, you can only make one father from a lacquer, and then
I've heard of people saying you could maybe get 2 out of it, but for the most part, my lacquer is destroyed when they make the first father. So that's why I'm cutting. I mean, that's something Larry told me back in the day, because when you got a job, it wasn't you cut one set of lacquers and send it to the plant. You would cut 10.
I see.
One to the plant, in Detroit, one to the plant in Florida, one to the plant in LA, one to the plant in Atlanta, So you can tell by looking at some of these matrix numbers, which you can imagine brings forth some arguments like the Atlanta pressing sounds way better than California pressing. But that was when they got a job, it was a lot of lacquers, and of course they didn't have the shortage that we have today too. So that all weighs in as well.
Do you know how many mothers can be made from a given father?
I'm not sure, but I think 2 or 3.
Gotcha. And then
I might be really wrong on that, but that's what's in my mind. And then the mothers, however many stampers you can make out of that, I think it depends on the music too, and how fast the stampers wear out can depend on the music. If it's certain, or the weight of the record. If it's a 180 gram thing, I think it'll wear them out quicker than the others. But I think it's all kind of subjective. There's not a hard line, and I would imagine with the different brands of new presses that are being made now, there's probably different longevity you can get out of. I'm sure different manufacturers would say you can get more out of my machine than you can.
Gotcha. Let me just make sure I haven't missed anything here. I got everything except just like talking through a few more records that you cut that I have. So you cut I Am the Cosmos.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. What can you tell me about that? That was another, I think Michael Graves got his hands on it first.
Yeah.
But and that was part of that kind of same series, wasn't it? Was that also like the whole Memphis thing,
That one,
or not
no, because
necessarily?
the Memphis thing all came from Kraft Concord. So that would have been an
Oh, this
omnivore.
is Omnivore. That's right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So Omnivore give you that. Um, you seem to do a lot of stuff from Fat Possum.
Yeah.
Do you have kind of a specific relationship with them? This is
Oh yeah.
actually the only thing I have from them that you cut, but the newest X record.
Most all of the Fat Possum stuff comes through me and Lucas. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So
And I'm guessing that's key to survival of an independent mastering house is developing those relationships so they can get a steady flow of work coming in.
absolutely. And it comes, it comes from all over. Everything from, local acts here in Memphis to, I do have a lot of relationships with a lot of different labels that once they're comfortable with you and vice versa, I think, you get a relationship, and it's like any relationship. You got to work to make each other happy, and if it's going well, then they tend to stick with who they like, and but they can leave in a hurry.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I know you mentioned to me in an email about the From a Compound Eye, the Guided by Voices
Yeah,
thing.
you've done a ton of their recent stuff. Guided by Voices, like I'm a huge Guided by Voices fan, but they put out so much stuff, and they finally wore even me out. So like I haven't got any of their recent records, but this reissue of this older Bob Pollard solo album is awesome. Um, and so you've cut a lot of their recent stuff, and it sounds like, has that gone away?
Oh, but well, from what I understand, yeah, that's no more.
Oh no.
And I haven't talked to the, I had a great relationship with the label that he had his own label, Rockathon, I think, and they're super nice, cool people, and I never got any complaints other than, and I actually got quite a few compliments how happy he was with the stuff.
Yeah,
But
yeah. No, this sounds awesome. Best
what
I've
I've
ever
been
heard it.
told is that, he always wanted it louder and louder and louder. And I would explain there's only so loud I can cut it before I potentially damage my lathe. And really, man, I can cut it. These are bright records too. Again, evidently there's some record that he's comparing it to now that he's way into. And I found out basically because one of my other cutter buddies called me and said, we were doing it before you started doing it. I go, oh man, I didn't, I'm sorry. I didn't want to steal your gig. He goes, no, we were happy that you got to start doing it for us. I guess there was some, a lot of back and forth, but basically he wanted to have acetate sent to him before we cut the real one. And I just don't do that. I can't, because I can't afford the spare lacquers. Doing acetates isn't the same thing as it was back in the day when you did it for everything. Think of it like this, because back then the engineer was basically our producer was handing off the final mixes to the cutter, also mastering stuff. So he was going to probably, do more to it as far as getting it into shape to cut the lacquers from, as far as EQ and compression and volume and all those things that come into play. So yeah, I could see why they'd want to hear what he does before they make the final cut. But now I'm cutting most of the time from a pre-mastered for vinyl master. So the band has had the opportunity to hear that.
So you're cutting it flat. The thing that you get it, you're cutting flat basically.
Yeah, but I don't really think there is such thing as a flat cut. It's just that the ones who I like the best, the mastering engineers who do the pre-mastering the best, they basically get it to a place where we know each other, how far they go to give it to me and let me land the plane, basically,
Yep.
So it's not a flat cut, even though that's what we may call it. But I'll have some producers call me and literally go, don't do anything.
Yeah.
But
otherwise they're getting it in the ballpark maybe, but you're doing.
That's pretty rare. Most of the time they do your thing and it works out.
Yep. Gotcha. Hmm. How is it? I think I'll have to make this the last question because I kind of got to get moving myself here. But how is it for you getting lacquers?
I'm okay. I was using MDC lacquers before the fire because the quality was, in my opinion, so much better, more consistent. Even though they never offered refunds if you got one that wasn't flat or if it was noisy or whatever. You know, I always test on the outside of the edge. I cut a little bit at silent groove and listen back and measure that. If it's too noisy, I'd throw it away, you know.
You just
They're 60
SOL.
they're $60 a pop now, basically, man.
Hmm.
And they don't give refunds back. So that's a bit of a drag if you get 4 or 5 out of a box that aren't good. You just eat it. That used to worry me some, but you just can't. It's just part of the deal, you know.
Can you use it to like cut a 10-inch instead or something like that if the outside's bad?
Yep, good thinking. We do that sometimes. Yeah, if the outside's just a little ruffly, we do. I don't just throw them out. And the other thing is we got to use those scrap 14-inch lacquers. I use them as spacers on the bottom of the box when I ship. So, you know, it hurts you a little bit. It's like I've got a $60 spacer at the bottom of this box. You know? But yeah, I'm doing fine. I get and I have a good relationship with the distributor too. So if I get in a place where like I'm gonna need, you know, I can whisper in there like, can I get an extra box this month? Usually they can swing something.
Yeah. Okay. One very last thing popped in my mind. I can't resist. Are you doing okay on time?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. One very last thing, which is let's say there was a person out there that was just vaguely interested in perhaps getting into the lacquer cutting business. What would you say to them? Because so people I've talked to so far, so Kevin Gray, for example, in 1972 was hired straight out of high school. You know, he was really good with electronics, so he had some skills, but he had no formal education in this at all. You, however, like you knew how to run all this equipment basically, except the lathe, but like you got music, you were an engineer producer for years, you got all of that in. So I imagine for you, it's more or less a question of just learning how to use the lathe, but the rest you basically know how to do. You know, how does someone get into this?
That's a great question. You got to be part crazy, I think, at least to start with. I think it's like very much like any young engineer who goes, how do I get into the business? You know, there's a story about one of the Marsalis kids, and I don't know if I can't remember which one, but I saw him interviewed, and he said that when he was leaving New Orleans, he told his dad, he goes, I'm going to go to New York with my trumpet and try to make it. And he said, what's your backup plan? He goes, I don't have one. He goes, you'll be fine. And so I think it's that same kind of way with music, getting into the music business and engineering. If the only people that should get into it are people that there's no way to talk them out of it, you know, and that's the way I was. Certainly I didn't do it because I wanted to hang around rock stars or imagine that I was going to be wealthy or anything like that. It just, once I got a taste of it, it's like there's no way I could imagine doing anything. I have to be part of it. And it kind of became the same way with the lathe. I mean, knowing how hard I've worked to learn it and to do what I'm able to do these days, if I knew, I don't know if I would have started, you know, because there's been some really tough times, but it's like anything else. I think if you have passion for it and you love it, I think, you know, if you're a reasonably intelligent person and have a good heart and you're a hard worker, why not you know? There's just no way to stop it. It's really like that, I think.
Yep.
And most people in the music business who've had some success, I think, would tell you the same thing. So I get people, you know, I've had people all the time ask, especially when I was engineering, like, how do I do it? How do I get in? Can I come sit in on your sessions? And you can tell, I've done that a lot, you know, but you can tell in one day, usually in a couple of hours, you can tell if that person has got the thing or not. With Lucas Peterson, who's worked with me now for well over 10 years, from the time he was an assistant. I mean, he came to Ardent at a time when I was changing over. The guy who had been working with me a lot was starting to engineer and leave the nest and do more of his own thing. So I was trying all the guys out. And and most of them were fine. But the first day Lucas worked with me, I did what Hampton did to me. I said, man, this is your gig. You want it? And he was like me. He's like, oh, everybody will be mad at me for leapfrogging over him. And you could just tell, man, he had the thing. He was a good hang. He knew his shit and worked hard. And, those are the traits that it takes, I think, whether you're in producer engineer or cutting vinyl records or what have you. It really apply, or being a musician, really, I think it all ties in.
Totally. Okay. Yeah. All right. I think we better wrap it up there. Anything else you want to say in closing?
Well, it's been a pleasure to meet you, and I hope to see you sometime. And of course, if you're ever in Memphis, Tennessee, let me know. Come by, and I'd love to show you around Sam Phillips.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to do that. All right. Yeah. Thanks so much, Jeff. I'll stop the recording soon here, but after the recording, I'll talk to you for a minute too before we hang up. So
okay.
Thanks so much for doing this. So long.
Thanks. See you later.
Yep. Bye-bye.